No one could explain why Adrian Vale, the only son of one of the wealthiest men in the city, lived in constant pain. The headaches came without warning, crashing through his skull like thunder, stealing his breath, ruining every moment that was supposed to be perfect. Doctors from 3 countries examined him. Specialists with cold hands and polished words shook their heads. MRIs, scans, treatments, nothing worked. Painkillers dulled the edges but never stopped the storm. By 16, Adrian had everything money could buy except peace. His father built hospitals in his name. His mother cried quietly behind locked doors. And Adrian learned how to smile through agony. On a quiet afternoon at a charity event hosted in his family's glass palace of a home, Adrian slipped away from the crowd and collapsed onto a shaded bench in the garden. The world spun. Light stabbed his eyes. His fingers trembled as he pressed them against his temples, fighting not to scream in front of strangers. That was when he heard a small voice. "Mister, your nose is bleeding." He opened his eyes to see a tiny girl standing in front of him, holding a paper napkin with both hands as if it were a serious medical tool. She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9. Her sneakers were dusty, her dress wrinkled, her dark hair tied in an uneven ponytail. She looked completely out of place among the silk dresses and tailored suits. "I'm fine," Adrian whispered, though the lie felt heavy. She frowned at him with surprising seriousness. "No, you're not. When my brother gets nosebleeds and headaches, it means something is stuck." Adrian almost laughed, but the pain spiked, sharp and sudden, making him gasp. The girl climbed up onto the bench beside him without permission. "Hold still." Before he could stop her, she gently pinched his nose and tilted his head forward the way she must have seen a doctor do once. Then, with careful fingers and fearless focus, she peered closer. "There," she murmured. "I see it." Adrian barely felt it when she tugged lightly. There was a strange pressure, a sudden release, and then the headache cracked open like a broken wave and drained away. He gasped, not in pain, but in shock. In the napkin she held was a tiny, hardened fragment the color of old rust. No one in the family ever figured out what it was. Some doctors later guessed it had been lodged deep since childhood, slowly causing infections and inflammation that triggered the agony. What mattered wasn't the science. What mattered was that the pain was gone. Adrian stared at the girl like she had just performed a miracle. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice shaking. She smiled proudly. "Lena." And just like that, she hopped off the bench and ran back toward the service exit where her mother worked as a cleaner. By the time Adrian stood up, pain-free for the first time in years, she was already gone. For weeks after that day, Adrian searched for Lena. He asked staff discreetly. He checked school records near the estate. He even walked through the nearby neighborhoods where wealth faded into narrow streets and small shops. Finally, he found her outside a tiny bakery after school, swinging her legs off a brick step. When he thanked her properly, her eyes went wide at the sight of the luxury car pulling to a stop. "I just helped," she said shyly. But Adrian knew it was more than that. From that day on, an impossible friendship formed. He helped her with homework. She taught him how to laugh without holding back. They shared sandwiches on park benches instead of grand dining halls. She told him about her dreams of becoming a doctor. He told her about the fear he'd lived with every day, never knowing when pain would return. And the pain never did. Years passed. Quietly but firmly, like steady footsteps on a long road. Wealth kept Adrian in private schools and distant cities. Life kept Lena in modest classrooms and crowded buses. Yet they never fully disappeared from each other's lives. Sometimes it was a letter, sometimes a phone call, sometimes just a message that said, "I believe in you." When Adrian turned 20, his parents finally stopped treating him like glass. For the first time, he chose his own path. Not business, not finance, not the empire his father built, but medicine. No one was surprised except his father. "I'm alive because someone ordinary refused to walk past pain," Adrian said simply. Across the city, Lena read that sentence in a newspaper interview while standing behind the counter of the same bakery. Her heart fluttered in a way she didn't fully understand. Years later, fate crossed them again in the least dramatic way possible, under fluorescent hospital lights, in a hallway that smelled of antiseptic and coffee. Lena was finishing nursing school. Adrian was beginning his medical residency. They recognized each other instantly. Time had stretched them taller, sharpened their features, reshaped their voices, but the connection was unchanged. What was different was the way their hearts stumbled unevenly when their eyes met. What was different was that they were no longer children. Their love didn't explode into fireworks. It grew quietly, the way healing does. Long shifts. Shared exhaustion. Coffee at 2 a.m. Conversations about patients they couldn't save and the ones who changed everything. The past hovered between them, no longer as a miracle story, but as the foundation of something deeper. Adrian once confessed, "I used to think my life was restarted that day in the garden." Lena smiled softly. "I think it just finally began. But love, even gentle love, is never untouched by fear." When a new set of neurological symptoms appeared years later in Adrian, old terror returned. Not headaches, worse this time. Uncertainty. Tests. Waiting rooms that echoed with silence. Lena sat beside him through every scan, every restless night, never once leaving. For the first time, he was the one afraid of being saved. "It won't be like before," he whispered during one sleepless dawn. "What if this time, there's nothing simple to pull out?" Lena took his hands and pressed them to her heart. "Then we don't look for something simple. We stay anyway." The diagnosis turned out to be benign. Treatable. Life would continue. That night, Adrian proposed with no ring, no orchestra, no grand spectacle, just the steady honesty of everything they had survived. Years later, when their daughter asked how they met, they told her a softened version of the truth. That sometimes pain hides where we least expect it. That sometimes the smallest hands make the biggest difference. And that love doesn't always arrive with perfection, sometimes it arrives with trembling, fear, and the courage to reach forward anyway. Adrian never again feared the quiet. Because every time life grew loud, Lena was there, just like she had been in the beginning, steady, brave, and unafraid to help him breathe again.